Hello, guys. So, let's do a quick review of literal equations or manipulating formulas. Our first step is always going to be to identify what we are solving for. So in this equation, P equals IRT, we are going to be solving for T. You will always be given that information. So our goal is to rearrange this equation to where it looks like T equals. Now our second step is to list every operation, and by operation I mean add, subtract, divide, multiply, raise to an exponent, take the square root of, or some other type of mathematical symbol. We're going to list it. So if I look at T, I'm going to ask myself, what is happening to T? In this case, T is being multiplied by R, so the first operation I wrote down is it's being multiplied by R. It is also being multiplied by I, so I wrote it's being multiplied by I. And my third step is to then list the inverse operations. So the inverse of multiplication is division. So to solve, I'm going to divide by R. The inverse of multiplication is again division. So to solve, I'm also going to have to divide by I. This is where we know exactly what we are going to do to solve the problem. So to solve this, I'm going to divide each side of the equation by I and R. What I do to one side of the equation, I must do to the other. And these IRs will cancel out, leaving us with our answer. T equals P over I R. Okay, let's look at this second example. Area equals 2 times length plus width, all in parentheses. Now there are a couple of ways to solve this, but let's focus on what we're solving for. So in this case, we're going to try to solve for W. Now I can choose to distribute or not to distribute, but I would like to think that we're not quite ready to really sort of manipulate these things without distributing. So I'm going to first distribute. So now I have A equals 2L plus 2W. I distributed it by 2 times the L plus my 2 times the W. My next thing, remember, is to write down each step that the W, each operation being performed on the W. So we can see that W is being multiplied by 2. And this W is also being added to L. So to solve this, I'm going to write down the opposite, the inverse operation. The opposite of multiplication is division. So my final answer is going to be divided by 2, and it's going to be subtracted by 2L. So the first thing that I want to undo, I can choose to undo the division by 2 or undo the subtraction of 2L. We're going to do it both ways. Let's try undoing the division first. If you divide, you must do it to each and every term. So let me divide each and every term by 2. Now I'm left with A over 2 equals L plus W. Now, because this is a positive L, I'm going to subtract. my L. A over 2 minus L equals W. Now let's talk about this format. A over 2 minus L, and we're going to pretend like it's over 1, equals W. In these situations, people want you to find a common denominator. Just like if you were adding regular or adding or subtracting any fraction, you see that the denominator here is 2. The denominator here would be a 1 because anything over 1 is just itself. So I'm going to multiply the top and the bottom by 2 so they then have a common denominator. So my final answer would be A minus 2L over 2 equals W. Now let's backtrack and solve this, but we're going to do the subtraction first. So the first thing I'm going to do is subtract 2L from both sides. I get A minus 2L equals 2W. And then I'm going to divide by 2. And I get W equals A minus 2L over 2. The same answer that I got using the previous method. But as most of you will notice, doing the subtraction first made it easier. We didn't have to find a common denominator. So when you're thinking about equations, all right, remember we are unwrapping a present. We've already gotten the answer. So we're working our way outwards in. So when you're undoing operations, the easiest method is going to be to work backwards from PEMDAS because we're undoing. When we're trying to solve in our order of operations, we always go from left to right. But when we're dealing with equations and we're working with the opposite operation, it makes sense that we would go the opposite order. So for the easiest way to solve, you should undo addition and subtraction first, undo multiply and division next. Then if we had any exponents, undo that. So this is one way, once we list our inverse operations, to figure out what order would be easiest. I also want to point out that when you look at the two operations that we decided we were going to need to solve this, and then you look at your answer, what do we notice? We notice very quickly that the variable that was solved for, right, it's kind of a shortcut. I could literally say, well, this was written in terms of A equals. And I discovered that the operations I need to get this in terms of W equals is to divide by 2 and subtract 2L. So when I look, my final answer just took A, divided by 2, and subtracted 2L. So this is kind of a shortcut once you get to your list of inverse operations. Let's take a look at this example. We've got volume equals 4/3 pi r cubed, meaning it is raised to the third power, which is the same thing as saying r times r times r. First thing I'm going to do is figure out what I am solving for. I am solving for r. My next step is to look at my equation and write down every operation that is being performed on r in the original equation. R is being cubed, R is being multiplied by pi, and R is being multiplied by 4 over 3. So my inverse operations, the opposite of cubing a number, is to take the cube root of a number. The opposite of multiplication is dividing, so we're also going to divide by pi. And the opposite of multiplication is again dividing, so we're going to divide by 4/3. Now remember, if we are dividing by a fraction, we remember to keep, change, flip. Or our new way of saying it is that when we divide by a fraction, we multiply by the reciprocal or multiply by the flip. So by divide by 4/3, I'm also going to write that this is the same thing as multiplying by 3/4. So now that I have which steps I'm going to follow, I can get rid of my original list because to solve, I'm going to do these 3 operations. Now, if we look at it from backwards from PEMDAS, the first thing that I would want to do is any undoing, addition, and subtraction. I don't have any of those operations, so I'm going to move on. The next thing I want to do is to undo the multiplication and division. I don't want to undo my cubed because then I would have to take the cube root of 4 over 3 and pi, and I want to get rid of that first. So I am going to get rid of my pi first. I'm going to divide this by pi, and I'm going to divide the left side by pi. So my new equation is v over pi equals 4/3 r cubed. So I have completed this operation. The next operation I'm going to do is multiplying by 3/4. So now you can see you have 3v over 4 pi equals r cubed. And my final step is going to be to take the cube root of both sides, because to undo an exponent, you take that root. So if this was raised to the power of 2, we would take the square root. If this was raised to the power of 5, we would take the 5th root. And we indicate what root it is by a little number in the left quadrant right there. So I'm going to take the cube root of r on this side and the cube root of r on this side. So our final answer is r equals the cube root of 3v over 4 pi.